Morning. As Matthew was saying, I've got the fun job at the moment of making a film series for the church called Big Questions. I don't know if you've seen it. Hello, Shirley. Speaking of film series. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen the ads for it or whatever. I'm not here to do a promo, but what I did want to chat about was some of the people we've been talking to on the topic of the human mind. And we've kind of, my son Marcus and I, who's co-presenting it with me, we've been traveling around talking to some crazy people and crazy humanoids. There's little Asimo, who, has anyone seen Asimo at Disneyland or wherever? Yeah? You know the basic concept, little humanoid robot. They think, the Japanese, that there will be a big market for robots because of aging baby boomers who want virtual company. And they say the great thing about Asimo is, if they get him, I know. If he'll go and fetch things for you when he's a little bit more evolved, as they say, and he'll also sit and listen. And the designer said to me, he will not mind if you tell him the same story 20 times. Okay, if you think that's company, well, good. But that's the main market. And of course, Honda is investing quite a lot of research and development funding behind Asimo. And I've got to say, I'm really impressed with how that little creature can move. The more you watch him, the more you realize the awesomeness of walking, just basic ambulation. Now, you and I probably do it every day and don't even think about it, unless you watch a child learning to walk and mastering all the massive skills. And you probably remember, it's pretty fresh in my memory, how a kid will, take a couple of steps. Yay, that's a huge celebration. But it's only the beginning. Because then they've got to learn to walk on slightly slanty ground, and you can see them making the mental adjustments, and then they've got to learn to walk up steps and down slopey things without falling forwards, and it's just major data processing has to go on to allow that to happen. And so the more we watch robots doing their thing, and the more we try to, in a way, recreate ourselves, I think the more blown away we can be by the creation that happened in the first place. Take a knee, for example. You've probably never thought about it until you've hurt your knee in sport or something, but a knee has an incredible ability to adapt without any conscious thought on your part. It just does it when you need to sway or move or walk on uneven ground or cop some shock or what have you. And they've tried to reproduce this in plastic and metal. And you get the chief engineer there at Honda, the Asimo project, started, and he can just keep you there all day telling you the challenges and complexities of just basic walking. That's just getting the thing moving. And he was a really likable guy. They never really tell you who the main engineer is, but he's the team leader, because they don't want to, they want Honda to get the credit for this creation, not any particular individual. But this guy came out and he really knew his Asimo. And we said to him, do you think that robots will become conscious in time, like some specialists say, and like a lot of movies are promoting? And he was very humble and Japanese about it. He said, well, that's not our aim. Our aim is just to serve the consumer's market and to provide Asimo. He was right on message. He was obviously scripted. We just want to serve the consumers. And he wasn't going to make comments about whether they can become conscious or not. But you've seen the movies or heard about them. You know that there's this belief that eventually robots will become as smart as we are and then smarter. And then one of two things happens, right? It depends if you want to go the Terminator way, in which case it's a war between humans and machines. Now, if there ever was a messianic movie, that's it. This young boy is sent back to grow up as a human to help us win the war against machines, and his mother, just like Mary, suffers all sorts of... Anyway, watch it sometime as a messianic film. It's one of the best. But what it argues is that eventually the machines will become superior to us, and then we'll become about as useful as Cro-Magnon man in the evolutionary account, and we'll just drop away with a bit of help from the machines if we don't go quietly. Now, and if you've seen the Matrix films, you know that there's another dark scenario that we'll just become batteries. How ironic is that? All these years of putting batteries into electronic things, and then we end up becoming the batteries for them. And that's what they think will happen to us as the computers take over. And there are some, let me assure you, there are some very serious scientists and futurists and philosophers out there who think that's going to happen. They call it the singularity. But others have a much more positive view, that machines will become smarter than we are, but then they'll be our servants. And they'll give us this beautiful technological life that just all our dreams will be met by willing little high-tech servants running around and doing it all for us. My question is, if they're smarter than us, why would they stay our servants? Call me a pessimist, but I just don't buy that dreamy scenario. If you want a great film about it, look at Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams in it. That is such an intelligent story about many of the issues. You know, the robot becomes sentient, and then it becomes morally aware, and then it falls in love, blow me down, with the human being, and it lives forever. But then it chooses to die because humans die, and it wants to be a human. It's like, whoa, beautiful fantasy of a story. And I hate to spoil the fantasy, but the more scientists that I talk to, the more they say, it ain't going to happen. They're not going to get smarter than us. Some say that they may. This is a guy, you may have seen Professor Ishiguro, Hiroshi Ishiguro. He has made copies of himself, a little robotic copy of himself. And it's kind of hard to spot the human. When he and his doppelganger are interviewed together, it's really impressive that the artificial him looks almost like the real him and speaks just about as well. You've probably seen it on the news about a year and a half ago. Amazing. And you're just so impressed at the brilliance of this computer until you realize that it's actually being operated by a person in the next room. And so that what's really driving all that human-like behavior and thinking is a very human-like human, not a machine. And you go, oh, okay. Well, so it's really just animatronics. But he has thought a lot about this whole thing of machines becoming like us. And he's a believer. He thinks it's going to happen. You can see the dolls there that he's made. We interviewed them. We talked to them. We had our Japanese producer sitting in the other room operating them for us in English and speaking to us through their microphone systems. But they still put up a pretty impressive impersonation of a human being. So he's an optimist. He thinks it's going to happen. Here's one of his doctoral students, an Italian guy who, I mean, he's a genius. You talk to him and he says, I'm not so sure. I'm not sure that that all the things a human being can do. And funnily enough, one of the really tough things that they're trying to do is how to combine word with gesture. You know, we can't help ourselves, especially Italians, I guess. You know, you tie their hands together and they can't talk, right? But all of it, look at me now. Here I'm trying to talk to you, my hand's wobbling around as though that's got anything to do with what I'm saying, but it does. And one of the toughest things is when you get a robot to talk, how do you get it to gesture naturally? That's ridiculously complex. But can you imagine someone just standing there woodenly talking to you? It's like the old 70s robot movies, right? It just wouldn't work. And the more we learn about trying to crack these problems in robotics, the more, I think, we look at our own creation and go, my word, I didn't know all that was in there. I didn't know all that was in there. This is an early model by another Japanese robotics professor. Japan, by the way, I think is the leading nation for robotics. That's why we went there. And this metal woman, who, you know, I talked to her as tenderly as I could, but her heart was cold, what can I tell you? I even tried wearing WD-40 perfume, but it just didn't work. So, I had nothing. Her eyes just glazed over, look at them, my word. And the teeth, oof, don't even start me. When you talk to her creator, Professor Hiroshi Kobayashi, who is just this lovable guy, talking across the language barrier. We just thought he was the greatest. And he said, I've wasted 20 years of my life on AI. He's one of the best. He teaches at, I think, arguably the best university in Japan on this stuff. He's the guru. But he says, I've wasted 20 years of my life trying to get machines to have intelligence. And he says to us, it's never, ever going to happen. Because there is something about the human mind that cannot be imitated. And I go, what? And he goes, I don't know. And I say, well, how much do we know about the human mind? And he says, that's exactly my point. Do we know 1%? And he laughed. Do we know 1% of 1%? And he laughed. We don't even know 1% of 1% of 1% of 1%, he said, of what's going on in the human brain. How can we imitate it? How can we even begin? He says. And he says, I've given up on that. I'm just trying to make robots, useful, servants, as he puts it. They're never going to be intelligent, truly intelligent. And we'll talk about it in a minute, what that actually means, to be intelligent. Actually, before we go there, so what he does, he's trying to work on robots that can simulate human emotion, and he's got this receptionist doll called Sire that can kind of simulate emotion. We talked to her, and we could guess mostly what her face was meant to be feeling. But it's really just animatronics. And you talk to all these guys. You talk to Andrew Ng from Sanford, who's, again, one of the most publicized robotic scientists in the world, and you go, and he says to us, I went into this field because when I was a kid, I watched the Jetsons. And I loved all that stuff. I wanted to live in that Jetson world where little technological things did everything for us, even a dog, you know, come here. But he said it's never going to happen. He said control is easy. You know, robots can be awesome for control. You look at some of the production lines around the world. If you got a new car, it was very likely made by robots. He said one of his students has just learned to make a model helicopter fly upside down and fly the loop to loop. And if you think of the complexity in changing the rotor blades at the right time to get the thing to flip over and still lift, I mean, it's very complicated stuff. And he thinks control is doable. But then he says you've got to have perception. And that's really tough. How do you train a machine to look out there and go, oh, that blue thing over there is the sea. Oh, no, it's not. It's someone's pool. Oh, no, it's not. It's a dog bowl full of water. How do you train it to get a sense of perspective and scale and size and shape and texture and all those things that you do just by looking? You can pretty much look and put it together and go, oh, they've got carpet on the back wall of this church. Interesting. Okay, right. You can see textures and you just pick it in a second. Whereas the robot's going, it's beige with black dots. It appears to be fuzzy. No idea. And this is the problem. Perception, he says, is really, really tough. Seeing is fine. We've got great cameras, almost as good as the human eye. I love that it's almost. Better in some ways, but almost as good. Give us time. But perception is much more than that. How do you interpret what you actually are seeing? And then he says, and if you think that's hard, try intelligence. He says that's ridiculously difficult. He says he's trying. In fact, he's one of the leaders in this. He's wired up, I think it's like, forget how many tens of thousands of computers into this one great big thing called deep learning. And they're trying to imitate what your brain does. Because get ready for this, right? Your brain sits there and it has, rough enough, 100 B for billion brain cells. Some say 80, some say 120 billion, whatever. Let's just use a round number. 100 B for billion brain cells sitting there. And each of them is connected. So you've got, let's say, 80 times the population of China, number of brain cells sitting there, and each one of them can pick up a mobile phone and connect with another one when it needs to come up with some new idea. And he just says, we can't imitate that level of complexity. It's ridiculous. We're just not going to get there. And he says that that's our best bet, but he can't even get it to recognize colors or shapes. And when you think about how far computing has come, I'm not here to bag the process, the progress of these brilliant people, but when you think how far it's come in the last 70, since the 60s or 70s when it really kicked off, you think of the first computer you had, what a boat anchor of a thing it seems now. Just toss it over the side. It's rubbish. Computing is streaked ahead. But here's an interesting statistic. In the 1970s, Scientific American magazine said that to emulate all the things that a human brain could do would take, guess what? A whole empire state full of computers to do what your brain can do. Wow, ooh, wow, that'll never happen. Now, 2007, one of the authoritative magazines said it would actually take all the computers in the world, and that wouldn't begin to imitate 1% of what the human brain can do. In other words, and think how far computers have come since then. So, but in the meantime, we've discovered more and more and more and more and more about what the brain can actually do and what the human mind is capable of. And so this guy's given up. He says we're never, ever going to crack artificial intelligence. And so do many of the leaders in that field. This guy was a very, very interesting interview. Anyone know that face? Professor Daniel Dennett. He's one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. He's one of the 4 atheist evangelists who are out there. Well, actually there's only 3 now. One of them has gone somewhere. has passed away, and probably the wittiest and warmest of them all, unfortunately, has shuffled off. Christopher Hitchens, what a lovable ratbag that guy was. But Daniel Dennett is one of the leaders in promoting atheism around the world. Very bright guy. He's a professor of neuroscience and philosophy, as you do. And you talk to him about what the brain is. Let me make this really simple, because that's about the only level I understand it, to be honest with you. He says your brain is all about its functions, or that your mind, rather, is its functions. In other words, it is what it does. But hang on a second here. Already I have a major problem with that. If your brain is all about its functions, let's say there's a candle here and I shove my silly finger in it, and it burns me, and I go, ow, and I pull my finger out of it. That's what I'm meant to do. I'm meant to survive, right? I'm a survival machine, according to him. Evolving, survival of the fittest, it's all about survival. So I shove my finger in a flame and go, whoa, and I pull it out. That's the function. Great. That's true so far. But what else goes on? There's also the feeling. There's also the experience of it. There's the that I can't actually tell you about until you've felt it. Don't. Kids. How many times have I said that? And it's like, oh, now you get it. Okay, right. So there's a whole thing that goes with it. I can tell you all day about it. If you put your finger in a flame, it will burn you. What does that mean? Well, trust me, you don't want to know. And so, in a way, what I'm saying is there's much more to consciousness than just the function of survival. And I'm not sure that his model actually allows for that. He also kind of says, well, you know, here's how we got our brains. We just started, and eventually, by luck, one of the lower organisms evolved some kind of cell that produced something like consciousness. I don't know what something like consciousness is, but then a couple of them got together, and then they grew, and then it's just this story of increasing, you know the evolutionary story. It just grew by increasing complexity, eventually becoming the incredible, multi-connected thing that it is today. The most complex piece of matter in the universe that we know about has arisen completely by random processes. And at that point, I think it just defies the law of probability. It just, however many times you do it, however old the universe is, I just don't see the maths of that working out. And so I have major questions over his account. His account is the best, I think, atheist account. He has this book called Consciousness Explained. And what he basically says in that is it's all about your neurons. It's all about what your neurons are doing, and it's all about their function. Well, okay, that's obviously partly true. You know, we can measure to some degree what your neurons are doing, what part of your brain's lighting up and stuff. But is that really all that's going on in a human mind? Is a mind just the same as a brain? Or is it something way more than that seems to be going on? If I could tell you everything about what's happening to your neurons right now, would I know what you're actually feeling? If I could map your head and say, oh yeah, this lobe and that cortex and da-da-da is firing right now, is that the same as knowing what you're actually thinking about? And let me guess what you're thinking about. I hope this gets a bit lighter. I wonder what's for lunch. What are we doing this afternoon? Oh, he just told a story about that. Oh, that's an interesting picture. Oh, what's for lunch? You know, all those things can be going on in a human brain at the same time. And maybe I'm just projecting what I'm thinking. And if you can map that neuronal activity, it's not the same as knowing actually what I'm thinking and feeling, which can be so ridiculously multi-layered. I can be sitting here thinking, gee, I love my wife. Oh, Tuesday I've got that really important meeting. And all those things can be swirling around right in the back of your head. And that's not even counting the subconscious. And that's not even counting what your brain's doing in terms of regulating what your liver's up to right now, right? Which is below consciousness. There's just so much going on in that little grey thing. So if you ask me, that account is pitifully inadequate. It just doesn't tell us what a human brain is. And a lot of his own philosophers, you don't have to be a Christian to say this, by the way, a lot of his own brothers in atheism will say, sorry, but your account just doesn't cut it. Let me give you one example. They talk about a thing called qualia. Okay, qualia is Sesame Street's word of the day for this Sabbath. Okay, so qualia. What it means is the experience of something. So let's say that certain chemicals enter your nose. It's a beautiful image, isn't it? And they react. It's called stereochemistry. The shape of those molecules bonds with certain receptors in your sniffer, your delicate proboscis, and and the nose goes, that's such and such, and there's a chemical reaction in there. Right? And all this data goes into your brain. This is a chemical that's coming in. And you either go, "Poor, right? How has that banana been left in the car for the last week?" Right? Or I know why, I've got kids. Or you go, great perfume, honey, what's the brand? Okay, it depends. And you have that experience. Now, one of those experiences is pleasant, and the other one is not. And you can describe the chemistry till you're blue in the face, but it doesn't actually describe the feeling, the experience that you're having of that. Let me give you another example of qualia. Let's say that I can tell you everything about the bat. I can tell you everything about the life of a bat. I can't, but let's imagine that I can. I can tell you exactly what they love to eat and how it tastes to them. And here's the tough one. I can explain to you how on earth they perceive the world. You and I perceive the world by looking and listening. They don't look. They just listen. They just have these beautifully engineered ears that just take in all this sound. And I mean, don't get me started. They have this incredible ability. Some of them can fly through the blades of a slow-turning fan. That's how incredible their bounce is. And just think for a second about how complicated it is to be a bat. Well, we just think of it simply. You've got to send out these pings, and a ping comes from here, and it hits that microphone stand, and it bounces back to me, and I hear the ping, and some brilliant part of my brain puts it all together into a kind of a sound picture, and I go, there's something solid there in that shape, but there's nothing just to the left of it, and I zoom around there. But hang on a second. While I'm over here, I send out a ping, and it bounces there, and one more goes there and there and there and there and there. Let's say that I send out a ping every quarter of a second. And let's say that one ping actually goes as far as that speaker, way over there, and then it comes back to me. Whereas this one goes all that way, only this distance, and comes back to me. And let's say they both arrive at the same time. What am I going to do with that? That one's way louder because it hasn't faded through a whole lot of distance, inverse square law. That one comes at the same time. How do I interpret that? How do I put all that together? I know. I'll let my ping go so I'll know which ping it was. Right? And it was a high ping. It was a C sharp, high. This bounced back from there, so I know that was a high one that I let out a second ago. And the one that's coming back from here is a E flat, so I know that it's more recent. And my brain processes, what? That just makes me tired to talk about that level of complexity. And that's what a bat can do. Let's say I can tell you all that kind of stuff. And let's say that I can tell you about the bat. By the way, one thing I do know is that male bats, the thing that really attracts them to a girl is hairiness. Furriness of body. Some people pay good money to get the very opposite, but furriness of body, because if he sends a sound and it bounces off her, it comes back nice and fuzzy, baby. So that I do know about the life of a bat. But let's say that I could give you a brilliant lecture for 4 hours here and you're all awake about a bat. Is that the same as being one? Is that the same as how it feels to be a bat? So what I'm saying is there's a massive difference between just knowing facts and actual experience. And Dan Dennett's model doesn't take qualia into account. It doesn't take that experience into account. It can tell you what the neurons are doing, it can tell you, but it doesn't say what is it like to experience that and how does it feel. And I think we all know that there's more to us than just logic and processing, that we feel as well. Let me give you my list of things I think that you can do that a computer will never be able to do. And this is risky. There may be people in the room who are into IT or AI or neurology that know way more about this than I do. But let me give you my humble theologian's list of what I think we have that they never will. Number one, curiosity. Curiosity. I don't think a computer is going to be curious. It may know the score of a football match, but it probably won't care. And if it's a Friday night semi-final, it's probably not going to be tempted to watch it on Sabbath, right? That's the important one to put on the list. That's very different from me. Okay, so curiosity is number one. I think also to have aims and objectives. You and I sit there and we want things. We're driven inwardly. Kids come into the world and you don't have to tell them, go and want stuff. They just develop wishes and aims and, it just kind of happens, right? hunger being an obvious one. Company and the urge to connect and be loved is another huge one. There's just a way that a human being starts to get all these desires and aims, and that kind of shapes them into a character and actions and this kind of stuff. That's a beautiful thing. A computer has to be programmed. A computer has to be programmed. And they can have incredibly sophisticated programs, incredible algorithms. But I was chatting to an IT guy the other day, and he said to me, an algorithm is really just a big long list of instructions. It's really just a big long list of instructions. He was talking about soccer playing computers. I mean, there's some incredible soccer playing little computers out there. But he said, really, you boil it all down, it's pretty dumb. It just is like this. If the ball is on your left, turn left. If the ball is in front of you, advance the ball, walk. Okay? If the ball is now on your right, turn right. If ball is between you and goal, kick. Boom. There were just these few basic rules that you put into these complicated algorithms. That's not intelligence. That's slavish obedience to somebody else's programming. And even though we may have moments when we're like that, I'm not going to mention any, no jokes, okay? Even though at times we're not free, even though at times we follow the crowd or follow fashion or follow what we think we're meant to follow or keep the rules or whatever, that can be good, I think underneath of that we're free. I think the other thing that we may have that computers may never have is genuine emotion, genuine feeling about stuff. Here's a huge one. Free choice. Free choice. If you're a parent, you know that no human being arrives in this world totally programmable. I really don't think they do. Even bug-eyed cult members are not completely programmable. They break away. They go and do their thing. They're free in certain ways. I think that's one of the most important things about what it means to be a human being. You're free to pursue your goals and objectives. And I've got a bunch of top IT people or AI people who will say a computer will never actually be free. But you are. And I think that's really important. It's really important for psychology. Now here's a question for you. For my atheist friend, and I use that word sincerely, for Daniel Dennett, is this. How'd you get freedom? If it's all about the neurons, which are cells, a cell is just the passive recipient of chemistry and electronics and electrical impulses and whatever have you. A cell doesn't initiate anything. A cell doesn't go, oh, today I want to go and surf. It just responds to stimuli. So what's your story of how you got freedom in a human being? Some of these guys really struggle with that. Some of them will say, actually, we're not free. We're not free. We're programmed. We're completely programmed by our genes, by our upbringing, by our culture. We're not free at all. We think we are, but we're not free. You go to the atheist convention, you can buy books about that saying your freedom is only an illusion. I think if you look inside your own head and heart, you know that you're free. You know that you're free. And I just don't think that argument convinces people because we know that we're free in certain important ways. If I want to, I can do just about any dumb thing I want. I know because I've done some of them. Right? And in a sense, I think that's really important to theology as well because to me, that relates to our scripture reading. That's part of what it means to be in the image of God. To be genuinely free. Genuinely free. Now I know, from a Christian perspective, we're going to say that sin in some ways clogs up our freedom, that it makes us creatures of habit and slavery, and that it locks us into unhealthy patterns, and that it dwarfs our ability to choose and stand on our own 2 feet, and it makes us, what's the word I'm looking for? It makes us kind of mindless and kind of chained, and that it restricts our freedom. And I agree with that. But even so, addiction being the prime example of that, I'm not really free, I've got to do this compulsively, I've got to. But there's a way in which I think God originally created us to be free, and that's really important, I'll tell you why in a second. But it's also, I think to me, one of the great things about the gospel is that God turns up with his Spirit, and by his Spirit, and goes, you've got a free choice now. Now that you've heard this, you've got the ability to respond to me or not. You've got the ability to make all these moral choices or not. You've got the ability to keep plodding along in your drudgery or to actually be free. As the book of Galatians puts it, brothers, we have been called to freedom, to liberty. And Paul says, don't use your freedom and your liberty as an excuse for your sinful nature to do its thing and all of that, but use it with love to serve one another. It's really important theology. And I think it's really important too in a whole bunch of ways because, well, just to name one, if you look at the suffering in the world and you go, God is to blame, I think one of the best responses is to say, well, actual fact, God made us free. And so much of the suffering that goes on is a result of dumb human choices. Some beautiful young wife is hideously treated in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago. Why? Did God do that? God made people free. And some guy made a really dumb decision, maybe a whole bunch of really dumb decisions of what he put into his mind and how he let it frame his view of the beauty and respect and intelligence of women. I don't know. And it resulted in that action. Is God to blame for that? I'd say not. I'd say the only way you could blame God is to say you shouldn't have made humans free. But the more you think about that, that's just dumb. What, you want to be a robot? You think you'd enjoy life just doing the right thing always because you have to? I don't think you'd be alive. I don't think you'd really truly be conscious if that's what you were doing. So freedom's a really important one as well. Let me just put this one out there too. Right now, a lot of Christians are getting into the whole thing of Calvinism. Okay? It's a really popular idea. And I'll throw this in for free. What Calvinism says is, you aren't really free ultimately to decide whether you're going to heaven or for a big sleep. Well, for an eternally burning hell, actually, it says. And what that means is, and I've discussed this with very dear friends and colleagues that I work happily with, but that creates a few problems for me. Because here's a horrible scenario. Let's imagine, God forbid, that I get to heaven on the first day and one of my children isn't there. Now, that's the biggest thing in my life. If you ask me my number one prayer, I pray that my kids will be in heaven. Okay? Everything else comes humteenth after that. But let's say I get there and one of them's not there. What I say to God is, with tears, thanks for trying. Thanks for doing your level best. Thanks for throwing every resource you had at the brain and heart of my kid. The beauties of nature, the calling of the Holy Spirit, the moral conscience, all of that stuff. You did everything you could to get him here or her here. But a Calvinist has to say to God, obviously, Father, it wasn't your plan that my child would be with you and with me for eternity. In fact, they're down there now screaming in unutterable agony, and they always will be. And at that point, I'm ready to reach up and punch God in the nose. Because how could you love a being that created somebody with that as the intention, as his intention for them? I can't do it. To me, that's the bug in that system. So freedom, I think, is something really worth jumping up and down about. And I know people think that Christianity restricts your freedom. I'm actually going to argue that having that creative God beside you and within you frees you up to be who you're ultimately meant to be, and that is a free being in his image. I think that's the best account of who we are and how we got here. And if you ask me to summarize this message quickly, what I'd say is this. Number one, the more we learn about robots, the more we realize that a human being is incredibly complex and that the human mind is just phenomenal. And that, to me, speaks of a creator. If you ask me which of these two stories makes most sense, in one of them, here it is. You've got a universe with just matter in it, just stuff. And through completely random, chaotic processes, it manages to cobble together the most complicated piece of design that the universe, or that we know of, has ever seen. Or the other story goes, there's a universe that has a whole lot of matter, but it also has this awesome big consciousness in it. This amazing mind sitting out there, and that amazing mind decides to replicate itself in a simpler form and put a bit of its incredible fire and genius into its creations and then let them live. Which of those stories makes most sense? I don't have to put my hand over my eyes and say, well, I choose to have faith. Just on thought alone, one of those stories makes a whole bunch more sense to me than the other. One of those stories makes way more sense. And when I look at my own experience, I don't feel like I'm this programmed, non-free automaton robot thing cruising around, which is the best, with respect, that Professor Dennett's model can give me. I'm more than that. I actually feel free. I actually feel like I've got some rationality. You may not know that by listening to this sermon, but I think I do. Some, not making a big claim here. But I also think I've got the ability to choose what I'm going to do with my life. I have the ability also to contribute something to the world if I so choose. I'd like to. I have the ability to love. That's a huge one. That involves a bunch of choice too, I guess, in a way. And to be intimate, truly intimate, connected emotionally and mentally in other ways with another person or other people. I have curiosity. I love living in this. I love that hymn that you guys sang. This is my Father's world. It feels like a great big playground, even though it's messed up a bit at the moment. It just feels like this great God gave us this and just go have fun, kids. And if you ask me, between those two stories, one a cold, random process of just matter, the other one a great intellect out there making us, that one makes so much more sense. And you might say, well, why would he do that? I'm going to give you a very dumb and simple childish answer. Why would God make us? I think it's for two simple reasons. In fact, I was a bit embarrassed. I was at a philosophy conference recently, and I was with all these brilliant people, and here's this Jesuit scholar, and here's this, awesome, and I'm sitting there feeling like the dumb cousin. And they're going around the circle and going, what's the main message of the Bible? Why did God make the earth? What's the essence of God? And they're all going things like covenant and things like, reconciliation and atonement. All these beautiful theological words are coming out. And then it comes to Muggins, and the question is, why did God make the world? And I just think the answer is obvious. For fun. I just think he did it for fun. I just think he did it for his own, well, if you prefer it in King James English, for thy pleasure it was created. Right? That's for fun. I think the other reason is for love. God just is love. God, the Trinity, it just is a relationship, not has a relationship, is a relationship. And there's just this God up there, sitting up there going, I want there to be more people to talk to, people to understand, people to know, people to love. I want there to be free little people, fascinating, interesting human beings. Let's make a few billion. I think that's why he did it. And in a sense, I think it's a really useful belief because it tells me who I am. It tells me that I'm not just a random orphan in a totally chaotic universe, but I'm a wanted kid. I have a purpose. I have a destiny. It explains my own inner feelings and desires that I actually do have free will and I do have aims and objectives, and it actually even tells me that I'm worth keeping around forever. Helps me to look death in the face and go, whatever, I'll be back. It's a beautiful idea. And I think it also makes a whole lot of sense of how we feel about ourselves. Talking to this guy, you may know that famous face on the right there, Dr. Ben Carson. Chatted to him and said, look, will we ever replicate the human brain? And he just laughed at me. He said, we'll never. It's the most complicated thing in the world. We never. This is a guy who works in it up to his elbows, maybe not quite, every day. I guess you'd call him the hardware mechanic, and the philosophers would be the software mechanic. And he's a guy who just says, we don't even begin to understand the human brain. And you talk to him, here's a guy who's widely respected in science, and also a man of faith, and sees no contradiction between the two. I'm sure there are times when he has a few debates with himself, but he, comfortably sits with it. You talk to this guy, Hank Hertzmer from Free University in Amsterdam. Whoa, he's a weapon. His big thing, don't get me started, you want lunch, but his big thing is that the brain doesn't work without a body. He actually makes it even more tough than... See, a lot of philosophers will go, yeah, you've got your mind there and your body there. It's dualistic. It's a split between mind and body. This guy goes, no, they're all part of the one. And let me put this very simply. When you look at it, there's more and more evidence that we're actually made as a unit. That if you ever could, take a brain out of the body and support it on some life support, it wouldn't work because it needs the body as part of its perception systems. For example, German psychologists have done some studies on kids learning maths, and they found that a kid who can't walk backwards can't do subtraction. And a kid who can't stand and balance on a balance beam finds it really hard to understand the idea of the number line and positive and negative. Think about that. Because walking backwards is kind of like subtracting only with your body, right? And walking forwards up the number line is adding and all of that. And if you can't do it, and so often kids who have learning difficulties with maths, these guys are trying innovative therapies of getting them to walk a lot and learn new physical skills and even crawl. So they get that left, right, step by step, do the maths, go up the number line. I mean, it's blown me away. If they're right, That's telling us that the human brain is embodied big time, or else it's nothing. And this, if I even begin to understand what this guy's saying as a philosopher of religion, that's his big point. That's a very Adventist idea, by the way. We're into this whole holism thing. We're into this whole idea of a person being one unit. And I found that really useful. This guy as well is Dr. John Luce. He's a philosopher of mind. You get him started on the complexities of the human brain. I wish we had time. He'll basically tell you that, well, to put it simply, that the atheistic account of a human being is nowhere near enough to explain all that we're capable of. It just doesn't explain us to ourselves. It doesn't the things I was saying, it doesn't explain free choice. It doesn't explain our aims and objectives. Why would cells just go, oh, I want to do this? It doesn't explain our love, our curiosity, our emotion, a whole list of things like that. Let me end on a rather more saucy note. We also, my wife and I went to a conference in Vegas, and already that's going to go downhill, right? But it was a very different kind of conference. Do you know who those guys are? This fellow on your left is Ron Jeremy. Everyone's going, don't know who that is? Good answer. Don't answer even if you do know. He's a man who has made more porn films than anyone else in the world. And you talk to him about it. And you say to him, listen, what's your life like? He gave us an interview. He's a very funny guy. He's like a rock star. He wanders out into the conference, and there's thousands of people there. And they're, oh, Ron, can you please autograph my... whatever. This is Ron. And you're not expecting spiritual insights to come tumbling out of that man, but you say to him, have you ever been in love? And he starts to look a bit sad. And he goes, yes, I have, 3 times in my life. And you go, what happened? And he goes, well, the nature of my work, they couldn't handle it, and they said it's either your work or me. And I said, why is that, Ron? Because if you were a tennis professional using your body for work, that wouldn't worry them. And he said, I know, but there's something in the way that human beings connect in that they just can't handle. I said, what's that, Ron? Isn't it just your body? Can't you just have a shower and come home? And he goes, no, it's more than your body, because a human being is more than a body. It's actually your soul. I'm going, that's a very religious word, Ron. And he goes, yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. I can't find any other way to explain my experience. I guess that's what I'm trying to say to you here today. You need a picture of yourself that fits with your experience. And when you talk to Ron, he's going to go, what I'm feeling with is with my soul. And I said to him, he says, by the way, I've got a Jewish background. I grew up in a believing Jewish family, and I know what's right and wrong. He said, I just can't seem to drag myself away from the work and the stardom. Going, right. So even there, it seems to me that we're seeing the truth of what the Bible tells us, that we're made in God's image. We're not just a body, but we have a spiritual self. We have a side to us that cannot be explained in merely physical terms. And here's a guy saying to us, I've got the stardom, but it's wrecked my ability to have a close relationship with anybody. How would that work if we were just the cells-only view of Professor Dennett? It just wouldn't make sense. But it does make sense with a biblical view, that you were created in God's image, that you were made for close relationship with Him and with another person and other people, and that that's who you are. I just think the evidence is blinding. I think more and more it points to us and tells us who we are and explains our experience to us in a way that makes sense. And I'm very grateful to God for that. Above all else, I'm grateful to God for taking a human body, becoming one of us, and then facing our biggest fear of all, which is death, and suffering that in a way that He could pay for our dumbest and meanest mistakes. And He could clean up the messes that we've made. And He could become one of us and suffer like we suffer and experience life as we experience it. And then, as the Bible puts it, taste death for every person. If that's true about God, that is an incredible, loving being that ought to be, really worth knowing. In fact, knowing Him ought to be number one priority for us. It's going to tell us who we are. It's going to make sense of our lives. And it's going to give us a view of ourselves that is realistic and hopeful, and give us the ability to look to the future with confidence, knowing that the God who wanted us in the first place wants us around forever, wants us to know him, wants us to enjoy life, wants to give us a rich, fulfilling, interesting time down here. And that's what I get excited about. Can we pray? Father, I don't begin to know what it means to be created in your image. Probably means to be somewhat rational and curious and capable of love and spiritual and free. And I pray that we would have a sense of how awesome we are. And I don't say that arrogantly because we're also broken, as you know. Just hope that we would have a sense that we're created just lower than the angels. That we're awesome beings made in your image, and that we'd respect ourselves and our bodies and our minds and respect others. At the same time, thank you for the other honest, ugly truth that we're fallen and needy and selfish and stupid and broken in some ways. And you know that. And that's why you came to be one of us and to fix the problem with the cross. That's why you took the hit that we deserved. You cleaned up the mess that we'd made. And you absorbed the moral fallout of our foolishness and selfishness. And now you look at us and say, well, why don't you want to live forever? Why wouldn't you want to just know me, whom to know is life eternal? And I pray that each of us would, in our own inner selves, with our free minds and hearts, make that decision. Pray that we would give our freedom to you, trusting you to make it even better than life would be on our own. And that you would just open our eyes as to what our potential is in Christ, and to what the calling is that you've called us to, and to just how much love you have for each one of us and for your whole creation, and the fact that you're coming back one day to fix it all up. What a huge hope that is. We admit our ignorance, but we trust in your brilliance. We admit our fallen sinfulness, but we trust in your perfection and your grace. Thank you. In Christ's name. Amen.